Hello everyone, my name is Anitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I am going to be going over a deck that I've been experimenting with and had some mild success at taking it to win a half a case event over at one of the LGSs near me, and I ended up getting 4th place with this deck. I didn't lose a single round, but I did end up tying twice out of the 5 rounds. So the ties kind of hurt my overall record, which is why I only got 4th place. Otherwise, I think this deck is a very strong deck, but I do think it is a little bit on the overhyped side, and it's definitely not as easy of a deck to pilot than what some people might expect, just because of some of the nuance that goes into the resource management that the deck is asking of the player in order to make the most out of your cards. So if you're curious on exactly what I was running, it was Hunters. So Hunters is the brand new deck that came out with BT12, so of course I had to try to dip my toes into it and see what the deck can do. So going over the Digitamas, I ran 5 Digitamas for Monimon, just because this is one of the best cards at letting us draw cards when we're being aggressive with our rookies out of raising. And then 1 Kozenimon, just because we still are trying to hard play some of our Digimon, and Kozenimon offers some card draw when we're hard playing our Digimon. So all of the eggs are letting us draw cards, and believe me, you want to try to draw as much cards as you humanly possibly can, just because of how this deck wants to work, utilizing the Digicross ability and utilizing your tamers. Next, when it comes to the level 3s, I ran 4 Gumdramon and 4 Psychmon. For the most part, they're doing almost the exact same thing at trying to just add cards to our hand, utilizing its inheritable ability when our higher Digimon are going to be swinging, or if we used it in cross with another Digimon of the same level. So these are the most important rookies in the entire deck, just because they help us draw cards. Not only that, they also have a nice cross ability to allow us to start putting cards underneath to build our stack, and they're going to also reward us with some resource generation. Psychmon allows us to pull cards underneath our tamer, so that way we could stick something underneath our tamer and then use Psychmon to pull it out later. And Gumdramon is the inverse. He's just adding to our tamer and allowing us to draw a card, so it's just some good cycling. Then when it comes to the other level 3s of the deck, I'm just using Kakimon for that DP reduction ability. He's not super great, but he's not bad either. And I'm also going to be running 3 copies of Drachmon for just the DP boost. I don't care about the cross, and I don't care about the on-play ability. He's just going to be like a Kakimon, fodder to shove underneath our tamers or use as fodder for our raising area. At least with Drachmon over a Kakimon, you do have the save ability on top of him, and you do have the option to Digicross and potentially use his on-play ability. Even though his on-play ability isn't great, they're just the other good cards that we could run, fitting on a theme with how the deck wants to play. Next, when it came to my level 4s, I ran 1 Tawarmon. Tawarmon, I think, is a pretty okay card. He drastically underperformed when I was utilizing him, just because the only way I could actually utilize him is paying for 3 on top of a level 3, which is a little bit on the expensive side, or digivolving for 1 on top of a black level 4. He doesn't have a way to cheaply digivolve up into him, which is part of his problem, but the D-Digivolve is pretty decent in terms of some extra form of disruption for the opponent with the inheritable ability of Blocker. But I do think that I probably would have done a little bit better if I was not running Tawarmon and if I was just running an extra copy of Damemon, even though Damemon is going to miss a decent amount of times, or more times than you would want to believe that he would miss, but he's still there just to be another cheap crossplay to try to dig and set up our tamers in the early stages of the game. So at least having him as the discounted version of King Shoutmon is definitely really, really good. So King Shoutmon is going to be the main level 4 that we want to use to set up our tamers, just because we have the option to be able to use the tamers in our hand to play them for free when we play this card, especially if we cross into them. So what I generally liked to do early on is utilize one of the purple to cross it into a shout to be able to play the tamer for free, and then in the preceding turn, I'll swing with the shout, get the card draw on top of the trigger off of whatever tamer that we could play to start trying to get the value engine going, and Damemon has some similar lines of play. It's just this, as long as you have a tamer in your hand that's not Watchmaker, is guaranteed to play a tamer versus Damemon, which could miss. So there is that huge difference, and the inheritable is also pretty decent at trying to delete some of the opponent's Digimon, so he has his own level of usability, making him one of the best level 4s for the deck, right next to the main level 4 of the deck, which is going to be Arresterdramon. So this is going to be your primary push card. So he's the only way that you have Rush in the deck, so he's going to help you try to be extra aggressive, just because you could cross for 2 into a level 3, and then Digivolve on top of him for 1 or for 0, utilizing your Tamer's ability, and then add another source underneath to be able to get that 2, and then be able to swing with Arresterdramon right away. And that's kind of the core combo on how you want to utilize this card, but he also has that very important inheritable ability, like we saw with Gumdramon and we saw with Psychmon, to be able to allow us to try to draw as many cards as we possibly can. So even if you do have to use him as a evolutionary fodder or inheritable source fodder, he's still just really good at just adding lots of value to the deck. And then the other level 4 of the deck that I was running was Clockmon. So I only ran 2 copies of Clockmon just because I don't want to see this card too often, but I want to see him just barely enough. So Clockmon isn't necessarily the greatest card to hard play because we can't Digivolve him to be able to make him cheaper to use, but he is at least a blocker when we hard play him, and he's going to be helping us search through our deck to try to find parts and pieces, while also having the save ability himself and a decent inheritable ability of jamming, which synergizes with one of our Tamers and one of our level 5s to be able to try to deal as safe and consistent damage as we possibly can. So he's still just a very good card for the deck to use overall. Then when it came to my level 5s, I was using 1 copy of Astamon just because I wanted to try to have the ability to go into a nice easy Quartz, so that way I could try to outrace and outtempo my opponent utilizing Quartzmon's ability to just stunlock their entire field. And on top of that, he also, at worst, in case you can't utilize him, because he does have limited usability, allowing us to only Digivolve him on top of Psychmon or on top of Arresterdramon. So he's not necessarily the easiest card for us to Digivolve up into, but he at worst can be used as fodder just because his inheritable ability, like Arresterdramon and like Gumdramon and Psychmon, still offers us that additional card draw, which is super important and super needed for the deck. I'm almost debating about bumping him up, but I'm going to be playing around with the deck a little bit more to try to flesh out the ratios. But I do like Omni Shoutmon at 2 copies. Omni Shoutmon is still just a pretty decent card, just because he's another point of aggro and control. In case we don't see our main level 5 that we want to utilize, he's basically just the backup, allowing us to try to be as aggressive as we possibly can, especially if we're able to form a really big stack for our Digimon. Then, obviously, the main level 5 of the deck is going to be the 4 copies of Arresterdramon Superior Mode. So, as an inheritable, he's like Astamon, Gumdramon, and Psychmon, offering us that additional card draw, which again is super huge and important for the deck because you can very easily run out of cards in your hand. But this card is just a really powerful card just because he can swing, and then his ability at the end of the turn will allow him to basically swing again. So he's just more added aggression into the deck, on top of having one of the best removal abilities in the game, as long as we have some Tamers set up with different colors to basically just force shove the opponent's Digimon underneath one of their other Digimon or their Tamers to be able to get rid of it, bypassing a lot of native protections that certain Digimon could have. That being said, because I'm running the Astamon and because I could Digivolve on top of level 5s with save, I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Quartzmon. So Quartzmon is just a ginormous floodgate that could easily swing games into your favor, just because he could be pretty decent to Digivolve up into. The wider the field between both you and the opponent, the cheaper this card will be. And on top of that, he's going to just suspend everything on the opponent's field. He'll suspend everything on your field too, but you're just going to try to utilize Quartzmon to win the game from there. And if the opponent is going to have to deal with Quartzmon, then that's going to be a lot of resources they're going to potentially have to spend, which means going into your turn, you should be able to unsuspend all your stuff before the opponent can unsuspend their stuff, so that way you have a easier use of your cards. But the fact that Quartzmon can just stunlock the opponent's field and win you certain games out of nowhere makes him still a very valuable and powerful card for the deck to use. As far as my tamer lineup, I went with 4 Taikis because you need the card draw. I am going to stress that again. This deck will run out of cards utilizing your other tamers, and you need the card draw. So that's why people are running him at 4. I'm running 3 copies of Tagaru. So Tagaru is another pretty decent card just because he's a memory fixing tamer. So that way you can make a lot of your level 4 plays as effective as you possibly can. So that way you could line up a cross with, let's just say, Shoutmon, set up another tamer, and then utilize those tamers if they have inheritable sources to be able to go into a fast and easy level 5 Digimon. So Tagaru allowing us to set that up and not be memory choked is super important. Then the dark horse of the 3 protagonists is going to be 3 copies of Yu Amano. I actually do not like this card very much, just because the gaining memory sometimes isn't necessarily worth it losing a card in my hand, and I found myself more often than not actually not using his ability, but you kind of do just need to run him just because he's a black tamer, he's a hunter, he's still adding sources underneath and able to make your Digivolutions cheaper, so he's still a good card. It's just he's one of the major problems on how you're going to run out of cards really quickly, especially if you're using them to cross into your level 3s or level 4s, which means that you're not drawing and you're using 2 cards to play 1, so therein lies the problem on why the deck needs to have as much card draw as you can possibly muster, is because of this. So I was debating about cutting him down, but you still kind of do just need to see at least one of him once per game, which is why I'm sticking with him at 3 copies. Then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Watchmaker. He's just another consistency tool. Unfortunately, he's not a hunter, but he is a white tamer that the deck can synergize and interact with, and he could also add lots of aggression when you have a lot of tamers set up, just because you could have like 1 or 2 Watchmakers on the field, or even if you're playing 3 Watchmakers, you could have them on the field, and then as long as you just have enough tamers, you'll be able to suspend, give your Digimon Security Attack Plus, suspend, give your Digimon Security Attack Plus. If Clockmon's underneath, they could have jamming, so that way their swing is going to be as safe as they possibly can, and you could start aggressing really quickly and really efficiently onto the opponent to try to close out games because of Watchmaker, while he's also acting as another consistency tool to be able to try to find cards to put back into your hand because of how much cards you're going to be tucking underneath your. And then the last card of the deck is going to be 1 copy of Overflowing Power. I kind of don't like this card, and I probably would have been better off running a Death X in its place, just because it can counter a lot of various other decks, and it's still just a really decent tech card to include in virtually any deck. But I wanted to experiment and see how Overflowing Power was. And it did come in handy in a couple of niche situations, but most of the time it just was a card that was stuck in my hands that I couldn't necessarily utilize effectively. But it still is pretty good at certain specific situations, allowing you to be able to utilize what's underneath your tamers to digivolve into your Digimon, so it could clear some lines of play and could make some of your combos a little bit safer than they normally would, because the opponent might not be expecting an Overflowing Power. So it's just a pretty decent filler card if you don't necessarily have or want anything else that you would want to possibly run. But I'm almost thinking maybe this would have been better as another Ostamon, or this would have been better as something else just to try to help me draw some more cards. So this could have been just another option like Calling from the Darkness as well, just because, again, you will run out of cards relatively quickly in the deck, and I think that's going to be the core strength of the deck, is how you're going to be able to manage your resources, and that might not necessarily be the easiest thing for a lot of players to pick up and to play right out of the gate, especially if they're new, and this would be a really good deck to help teach that skill. And the good pilots on this deck are going to definitely go very far with it. So as far as how my overall match events went, round 1, I tied against a Beelzemon. It was just a lot of good back and forth. He was controlling my stuff, I was controlling his stuff, and each game ended up taking 20 minutes, which means that when we got to game 3, we just didn't have enough time to finish. Then round 2, I faced a Bagra army deck. This was kind of an unconventional build. I think that Bagra army kind of wants to use a lot of the new hunter tools, just because a lot of the purple hunter tools can mesh and meld really well with Bagra, but this was just straight up Bagra, and it was designed just to try to stall out the game as long as it possibly can, just because of all of the tax effects that it offers. and it really was annoying to try to play around some of those taxings. So it just slowed down the pace of the game, and he won one just by rookie rushing. I won one just because once I get my setup, can pretty much ignore a lot of what he could potentially do. And then round 3, again, just ran out of time just because his game plan was a little bit on the stally side. Then round 3, I played off against machinedramon. The machinedramon player, game 1, basically got their BT9 megadramon and just started popping my tamers, and I basically couldn't play the game from that point forward. So he just had a really powerful early stack, which hard carried him through that match. Then round 2, I was able to basically just aggro him because he was a little on the bricky side. And then when it came to game 3, we were going back and forth pretty decently, but he accidentally misplayed, and he played a tamer, which allowed me to then Arrestodramon his big giant stack, and that was kind of the game from there, was because of that one little misplay, allowing me to be able to basically remove his Digimon. And if he would have just left that one giant stack up on the field, there was very little that I could actually do against it. Then going into round 4, it was a Hunter's Mirror. We pretty much were playing almost identical decks. He was a couple of cards off from basically what you see here. Most Hunter decks are going to be a little bit off from what you see here, depending on their tech and priorities. But I was just the luckier one of the two of us, and I just ended up taking the W. There was a really interesting interaction between Arrestodramon Superior Mode and Death Xmon, just because of the end of turn effects happening at the same time, where I was trying to swing with my Arrestodramon at the end of the turn, and he was trying to delete my Arrestodramon with Death Xmon's end of turn. So I would have gotten the when attacking abilities off of my Arrestodramon's end of turn, but the attack would not go through because once all of those when attacking abilities finished, then it would be the Death X's abilities turn to be able to delete my Arrestodramon. But luckily for me, I had enough memory to play around it, and I just hard played a Digimon and then swung with my Arrestodramon, and then at the end of the turn it was going to delete my low level Digimon, so my Arrestodramon suspended was safe to make that extra attack. So that it was how I basically won the game against the Mirror, with them utilizing Death X. One other important thing to note is if you have two Arrestodramons on the field with their stacks enabled to be able to attack at the end of the turn, you only get one of their abilities. So that's just something to keep in mind for any person or player who's playing the Hunter's deck to try to not make that misplay, or recognize if you're playing against it that that is a misplay and to call them out on it. Then when it came to round 5, I was playing off against Red Hybrids, and oh boy, that deck was really scary, especially for this deck, because I don't know if you noticed, but my security isn't going to be very good statistically, just because of all of the low-level Digimon and Tamers that the deck is running naturally. So Red Hybrids game 1 was just literally able to swing at my security with their level 4s and to put a lot of pressure on my security just because their level 4s became super big and had multiple security checks. So they were just able to aggro me out of game 1. Game 2, I basically recognized how that they were winning, and I basically just tried to rookie rush them down before they could get their setup going. And then game 3, it was a really close one, but I was able to just take what I learned throughout games 1 and 2 and just try to apply as much pressure as I possibly could to them, while trying not to play into some of their strategies and setups, utilizing all of their on-delete abilities, which is what makes Arrestodramon like super valuable and really, really powerful of a card to use. And that was good enough to land me 4th place in the half-case tournament, and I have 18 whole packs. That's like, what, 2/3 of a booster box to open? So let me just put all of this away, and we could have some fun opening up some packs. But if I were to make some changes to the deck, as I already mentioned before, I probably would take out the Tuarmon, put something else in its place. Debating about going down on the Amanos, but again, he is just a kind of necessary evil, and then I would definitely change the Overflowing Power for something else to try to help the deck draw more. You could also play around with the other rookies that aren't purple, just because they're not necessarily doing too much, so you do have a little bit of flexibility to be able to play around with certain things and clean up some of the ratios. so I don't exactly know what a fully optimized list is going to look like as of right now, but that's just what I would change based on my experience with the deck playing in this event. So let's just have some fun opening up some packs now. So all in all, not a bad haul, and I do think that BT12 is going to be a rather fun and enjoyable format with a lot of varied and different decks that you could play, and I'm curious to see how the development of the meta is going to progress with all of these new cards and all of the decks that are available to us. So who knows how good this is going to end up being. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.